Hello, and welcome to a Pokemon XD Gale of Darkness video, to where today we're going to be using the duo of Armaldo and Cradily. Now, I've already done these two Pokemon individually, and their lines aren't really that great. Armaldo's currently sitting at the top of B tier, so it's fairly average, and Cradily is sitting halfway down the C tier. But I think with the combined efforts of these Gen 3 fossils, they could definitely do very well, and maybe even push Cradily into a good spot. So with that, let's go ahead and move on to their stats. Now the first thing to note is that I'm not actually going to be using the pre-evolutions today, so that leaves us with Armaldo, who has 75 HP, 125 attack, 100 defense, 70 special attack, 80 special defense, and 45 speed, which makes it incredibly slow. However, its great attack stat complements its move pool very nicely, getting access to mostly normal, ground, and rock moves, which Stab Rock is incredibly strong in this game, as well as a couple water moves that, while not as strong, are definitely going to be very helpful. And then we move on to Cradily, who has 86 HP, 81 attack, 97 defense, 81 special attack, 107 special defense, and 43 speed. And while it is very slow, its well-rounded stats could be very helpful for taking hits and keeping the damage off of Armaldo. And I say that because Cradily really doesn't get that many good moves. It does have access to Earthquake, which is always very solid. However, I think Earthquake is probably better on Armaldo. It gets Ancient Power, which I said before is very powerful. But other than that, it doesn't really have that many great attacking moves. So I think it might end up filling a support role by the end of the game, but we'll have to wait and see. Anyway, moving on to our Armaldo in particular, which has a jolly nature, raising its speed but lowering its special attack, which is honestly fine. Having a little extra speed is probably nice, and the special attack isn't really all that useful other than Water Gun. It gets access to the Battle Armor ability, which prevents all critical hits, which is definitely going to be very helpful throughout the game, and according to Bulbapedia, it gets Scratch, Harden, Mudsport, and Water Gun by level 10. So with that, we move on to Cradily, who has a Hardy nature, which is a neutral nature, but that's honestly fine. It gets access to the Suction Cups ability, which makes it so I can't be forcibly switched out. That's not useful at all in this game. And according to Bulbapedia, it gets Astonish, Constrict, Acid, and Ingrain. So with that, we get into the game, and the first thing I'm going to do is get the TM for Bullet Seed and teach that over Constrict. And as you might guess from two final stage evolutions, they get through the early game very easily. So I went ahead and skipped the old man fight because it doesn't really do anything for us here, and we go straight to the Power Rangers. This time I decided to choose Brown. And I'd just like to say, if you are enjoying this video so far, consider liking, and if you have any Pokemon suggestions, please put them down below. Now, Brown really isn't that much of a threat because I do have super effective damage against his strongest Pokemon, which is the Baltoy, and Hoothoot doing neutral damage to both of us isn't really doing that much. So after just a few turns, Hoothoot goes down, and we move inside the Cypher base. And inside, I find other fossils just like me. Anorith, who goes down very quickly, and Lileep, who takes quite a while. Anyway, we move on to Lavrina. She leads with a Beautifly and a Love Disc, and between her two leads, Love Disc is definitely the stronger of the two, simply because it does super effective damage against Armaldo on the special side where he's not nearly as strong, so I want to take it down as soon as possible. So I go for another Scratch to finish it off, but unfortunately it survives with just a Sliver, which isn't great. Acid does finish it off, but I really wanted that Acid to hit Roselia, which is neutral to it, but it would have done decent damage because Roselia is much weaker physically. And Scratch really doesn't do that much damage, and neither does Acid. And Armaldo is now Leech Seeded, so Roselia is healing off of him. And after a Mega Drain, Armaldo does go down, so no more Leech Seed heal, but Cradily by itself isn't that strong. So unfortunately, despite its best efforts, it will eventually go down. But I do have a strategy in mind in order to get this done fairly quickly. And that's I'm going to teach Mimic to Armaldo over Mudsport. And then I'm also going to teach Seismic Toss. And that's because even though Scratch is doing decent damage, I think Seismic Toss will probably do more. And I go back into the battle and lose a couple more times before eventually deciding to go to Mount Battle to get a little bit of training done. In the meantime, I find a Lileep. Hello, other Lileep. Goodbye, other Lileep. And finally, I go back into the battle, this time a few levels higher. And now, with just that little bit of extra damage from Seismic Toss and the extra bulk that I get from leveling up, I can more often than not take down the Love Disc on the first turn and not take too much damage. Then out comes Roselia, Seismic Toss nearly takes it down to half, and for some reason this time it just decides not to use Leech Seed. So I get off scot-free and take it down with relative ease. And then out comes our final Pokemon, which is a Shadow Delcatty. Now I have gotten to this point before, but usually Delcatty would have Roselia's Leech Seed on it, making it really hard to get rid of. But this time it's not healing, so it should be easy to get rid of, unless I get infatuated from the Cute Charm ability it has. Okay, well I do get a crit, so I know I can take it down next turn with Cradily, and unfortunately I do get immobilized by Love, but Delcatty goes down, and then all that's left is the Beautifly, which Seismic Toss does over half to, and Acid takes it down to red. It lowers its defense, but it doesn't really matter at this point, and we beat Lavrina on the 4th attempt. Now, of course, you can't have a Pokemon XD Gale of Darkness video without the obligatory Mirror V. Anyway, it's always a pleasure to see ya, and we move on. At level 25, Armaldo gets Metal Claw, which I'm going to teach over Mimic. And then at the Realgam Tower, I pick up my two favorite TMs, Hidden Power and Protect, and I'm going to teach Hidden Power right away to both of them. Now, our Armaldo has Hidden Power Rock, which is going to be very nice because it gets Stab, and it's the only Rock-type move it can get before level 37 when it gets Ancient Power, and Cradily has Hidden Power Ghost, which Hidden Power Ghost is okay. There are quite a few Ghost and Psychic types throughout the game, but it is a little bit limited, only being effective against those two and not being able to hit normals at all. But anyway, I go to the tutor lady to go pick up the move for Body Slam, which I teach over to Scratch, and then we move on to the battle against Snattle. He leads with a Lantern and a Quagsire, and I'm really looking for two things right off the bat here. Body Slam to take Lantern down to half, which it doesn't, and for Quagsire to be a 2-shot with Bullet Seed, which it also doesn't seem to be. So that's not great. I go for Metal Claw and Hidden Power into the Lunatone, which I get a crit, so I take down Lunatone immediately. Unfortunately, that brings out Cast Form, which is a normal type, and because it's Hidden Power Ghost, it doesn't affect it, so it's able to get off an Icy Wind, lowering our speed even further. So now we're outsped by everything. I go for Bullet Seed to start whittling away Lantern, but it's a very slow process. Water Pulse luckily doesn't confuse. Go for Body Slam to finish it off, and then out comes his final Pokemon, which is Matang. Bullet Seed finally finishes off the Lantern, and then all that's left is that Matang. Go for Seismic Toss and Hidden Power, which Metal Claw nearly takes down Armaldo. Seismic Toss doesn't even do half to Matang though, but Hidden Power does take it down below half, and had Matang actually hit Armaldo that turn, there's a good chance I would have lost, but I won the 50-50 and beat Snattle on the first attempt. Moving on to Gonzap, he leads with an Electrode and a Nuzleaf, and Fake Out immediately stops Armaldo from doing anything. Go for Ingrain to start healing, and go for Hidden Power and Bullet Seed to take down the Electrode, which Armaldo gets paralyzed, and Bullet Seed doesn't really do that much damage. However, we are in a bit of a stalemate because they can't really do much damage to Cradily either. So Bullet Seed and Hidden Power nearly finishes it off. Okay, well this isn't looking good. I'm thinking I might need to do just a little bit of leveling. Armaldo goes down. Bullet Seed does eventually finish off the Electrode, then out comes Vileplume. And Acid? It does super effective damage against the Nuzleaf, I guess. So it looks to be doing about a third. I get put to sleep. Wake up using the call command, which I do like how this game does have a way to wake up from sleep. However, it might be just a little too offensive oriented, because waking up from sleep immediately kind of defeats the purpose of even putting a Pokemon to sleep in the first place. And if I were to rest myself, I could wake myself up with the call command as well. So basically it's the opposite of Gen 2 sleep talk sets, because you can just heal immediately and then wake up instead of wanting to be asleep all the time. What am I even going on about? Anyway, eventually I lose, and I decide to do a little bit of training against most of the grunts in here. I pick up the move Amnesia and put it over Acid, and I teach Protect to Armaldo because on the first turn I really don't want to get paralyzed. As well as at level 37, I get Ancient Power, which I teach over Hidden Power, and then I go into the battle again. This time I go for Protect on the first turn, and unfortunately I get the worst luck I could because they both decided to attack Cradily. Now with a few more levels and Ancient Power being very strong, I'm able to nearly take down Electrode in a single hit, and while I am now paralyzed, because Ancient Power has a 10% chance to give you a boost to all your stats, I now have an Omni boost that will carry me through the rest of the fight. Hidden Power finishes off the Electrode. Out comes Vileplume, who definitely doesn't want to take the Body Slam. However, in hindsight, I think that just going for Ancient Power again probably would have been a better option. Anyway, out comes Whiscash. Ancient Power, which takes down the Nuzleaf and brings out his final Pokemon, which is Skarmory. And I did get to this point as well in a previous attempt, and what I found out is that Skarmory is very strong. In fact, if I don't really have an Omni boost, there's a good chance that I lose, because Skarmory's Steel Wing does a ton of damage if I don't have a defense boost. Anyway, unfortunate paralysis after an unfortunate paralysis, a lucky Steel Wing miss, and another paralysis, and another Steel Wing miss, and finally Ancient Power connects, taking it down very low. Steel Wing hits me as well, doing a bit of damage, but eventually I'm able to take it down with Ancient Power, and that was some terrible luck on both sides. Anyway, at the top of the pyramid, I pick up the move for Earthquake, and teach that to Armaldo right away, and I teach Cradily Protect so that it can defend against the Earthquakes I'm about to be using. So, moving on to the battle against Gorgon, he leads with a Celio and a Lairon. On the first turn, the Lairon always goes for Protect, so I go for Ancient Power, which is super effective against the Celio, and then out comes Slowking. Go for Bullet Seed, but because Slowking is very specially defensive, maybe Hidden Power would have been better. It doesn't really matter though, unless it survives on just a sliver of health. Anyway, it misses a Water Pulse, and then I go for Body Slam into Ursaring. Okay, I was definitely overthinking it for some reason and made the wrong choice. Oh well. Out comes Shadow Primeape, go for Protect and Earthquake. Shadow Rush hits Armaldo, doing very little damage. Go for Earthquake, taking them down quite low. I go for Body Slam and Bullet Seed to finish them off. Body Slam finishes off the Ursaring, and then he brings out his final Pokemon, which is a Shadow Hypno. Now, Shadow Hypno might actually be a threat, depending on how strong it actually ends up being. Primeape goes down to just a couple Bullet Seeds. Go for Ancient Power, taking it down to half. Shadow Storm hits, doing much less than I expected. Hidden Power takes it down to a sliver, and one last Ancient Power finishes it off. So with that, we beat Gorgon, and we move on to the last area of the game. And they have a pretty respectable time, so I think they could do very well. However, if they start to struggle, they could definitely lose a bit of time, so let's see if they can keep up the momentum. First, we have Laverina. She leads with a Gardevoir and a Gorbis. I go for Earthquake and Protect right off the bat, which takes down Gardevoir and nearly takes down Gorbis. However, because Gorbis is the opposite gender, it is going to go for Attract. It just so happens to go for Armaldo, unfortunately, so I am immobilized by Love. But Bullet Seed finishes it off, so the Attract is now gone, which brings out the Shadow Farfetch'd. And Farfetch'd is always a bit of a nuisance, so I want to take it down as quick as possible. And I get another Omni boost, which is very nice. Out comes Shadow Altaria. Hidden Power takes Roselia down to half. Magical Leaf really doesn't do that much damage, but it does heal a good portion of its health. Ancient Power takes down Altaria in a single hit. And Hidden Power gets a crit and takes down Roselia. Okay, well that was pretty easy. Level 48, Cradily also gets Ancient Power, which I teach over Hidden Power. And then we move on to the battle against Snaddle once again. He leads with a Metang and a Quagsire. And I go for Body Slam and Bullet Seed to finish off the Quagsire right away because I really don't want to have my speed lowered, and I don't want Bullet Seed to not be a one-shot. Now, I decided to go for Earthquake and Bullet Seed, which means that I'm going to attack my partner, but Cradily is very defensive, and I actually get a lucky crit on the Scizor to take it down in a single hit, which brings out Shadow, Soul Rock, and Castform, but because I knew that the Earthquake would take down Metang, I went for Bullet Seed to start dealing damage to Soul Rock, which just so happens allows me to take down the Soul Rock in a single hit with Ancient Power. And the same thing happens again, where I can Bullet Seed the Pokemon coming in this case Shadow Starmie, which is always a big threat. Go for Earthquake to finish it off, and Castform goes down as well. So with that, we beat Snaddle very easily. And we move on to Ardos, who leads with a Shadow Swallow and Alakazam. And I really don't want to be hit by either of these, but they're both faster, and Swallow goes for Shadow Half right off the bat. And Ice Punch takes Cradily very low. I'm able to take down the Alakazam and the Swallow, but they've already done their damage. Out comes Kingdra and Heracross. Hopefully Heracross is a one-shot with Ancient Power, which it is not. Earthquake takes down Cradily. Ice Beam does quite a bit to Armaldo. I go for another Ancient Power, which does finish off the Heracross, brings out Electabuzz, which is a Shadow Pokemon, and Hydro Pump finishes me off. So while that might have been a total stomp, on the second attempt, we are always playing the Swallow Lottery. It goes for Shadow Sky this time. I get an Omni Boost, which is incredibly helpful. Out comes Kingdra. Fruity Pebbles rain down from the sky. And I think that the Swallow is going to be using Shadow Wind this turn, so I go for Protect on Armaldo, which it does go for Shadow Wind. However, it's only a 50-50 that Cradily will actually get it off, so I decide to attack this turn to take down the Kingdra. And then out comes Heracross. Now with the Omni Boost, I think I can take down Heracross in a single hit with Ancient Power, which means I just need to take down the Swallow as well while it's recharging. A Shadow Electabuzz comes out once again, and Swallow goes down, bringing out his final Pokemon, which is Shadow Snorlax. And there's no way I outspeed the Electabuzz without that speed boost, but with it, I'm able to get off the Earthquake before it can attack, taking it down in a single hit, and with that attack boost, I do a ton to Snorlax. So I should be able to take it down with an Ancient Power, and beat Ardos pretty easily on the second attempt. Moving on to Gorgon once again, this time he leads with Slowking and Ursaring. I go for Body Slam into the Slowking, doing quite a bit, and Ancient Power finishes off Slowking. Then out comes Aggron, and because I know that I can survive the Earthquake, and because I know that the next Pokemon is going to be an Ice type, I decide to go for Ancient Power into it, doing quite a bit of damage. Brick Break unfortunately went into Cradily. Ancient Power finishes off the Walrein, then out comes the Poliwrath. Now because it is a fighting type, Ancient Power isn't very effective, but I was really just hoping for an Omni Boost. Go for Protect and Earthquake, which takes Poliwrath down pretty low, and finishes off Ursaring, which brings out his final Pokemon, which is a Shadow Mr. Mime. And Mr. Mime really isn't that much of a threat, because as long as I can survive one attack, I should be okay. Go for Protect again, but it fails. It's only a 50-50. Go for Earthquake, Poliwrath goes down. Cradily goes down to a crit. Mr. Mime survives? Okay, well that's a little more threatening. Shadow Storm hits, taking me down to 39, but it's not enough, and Body Slam finishes it off. Okay, well moving on to Eldest, he leads with a Ninjask and Manectric, and I should note that this is the second attempt. It's basically the same as the first attempt, except I got a little luckier this time. Anyway, I'm able to take down the Manectric with Earthquake and Protect, then out comes Salamence. And Salamence is always a bit of a threat, but in this case it's actually going for Shadow Hold instead of Shadow Rush, which is definitely a much better outcome. So I'm able to take it down with 2 Ancient Powers, unless I get a crit and take it down in a single hit. Okay, well that's very nice. But unfortunately Hidden Power hit Flygon, which isn't very effective. But it is probably Cradily's best move to actually hit it anyway, so I go for Double Protect. This is just to stall out Silver Wind and the Fruity Pebbles. That way when I eventually get to the final Pokemon, it's not stuck using Shadow Storm immediately. Now Flygon is a bit of a threat because it seems to be wanting to go for Dragon Breath into Cradily and Flamethrower into Armaldo, and any of the status effects that come with that are definitely not great. Cradily gets the Omni Boost, and Fruity Pebbles finish off the Flygon. Then out comes the Shadow Marowak, and this is where I ended up losing last time. As you might expect, Marowak just hits really hard, so I definitely needed the extra damage from Bullet Seed in order to finish it off very efficiently. And then out comes his final Pokemon, which is a Shadow Lapras, and because I stalled that turn, I'm able to get here right as the Fruity Pebbles end. Go for Ancient Power, which luckily does take it down in a single turn. I wasn't certain. And finally, the Ninjask, despite getting one last crit, goes down, and we beat Eldest on the second attempt. Moving on to the big box legendary, Shadow Lugia. And Lugia probably could survive a couple of these, maybe. Ancient Power, oh never mind, that does well over half, and Cradily is no slouch either. Okay, well, moving on to the final battle against Gravel. He leads with a Shadow Rhydon and Moltres. I go for Bullet Seed. Hopefully it's a 2-shot on the Rhydon. And of course, Ancient Power finishes off Moltres because it is 4 times weak to rock. Then out comes Shadow Executor. Rhydon is a 2-shot, but it does require a crit, so I think that's effectively a 3-shot. I decide to not learn any of the stockpile moves. Out comes Shadow Tauros. Go for Ancient Power and Body Slam into Executor, not really doing that much damage, but we do have our attack down by 1. Luckily, Omni Boost immediately rendered useless by a critical Shadow End by Executor. So now I'm down to 4 HP, so I will go down this turn to the Fruity Pebbles if I'm not attacked directly. And then out comes Articuno. Now, I did kind of mess up the turn order here because I got the Omni Boost first. So Articuno just gets hit with a very weak Body Slam, and the Cradily goes down to the Fruity Pebbles, and Armaldo goes down to Shadow Chill. So I decide to do just a little bit of training in between, and I run into a Cradily, goodbye Cradily, and an Armaldo, goodbye Armaldo. After using up all my rare candies, I go back into the battle once again, and this time I'm almost certain I should be able to one-shot the Rhydon without a 3rd Bullet Seed. So I take down the Moltres just as before, go for Bullet Seed, and it survives on literally 1 HP. And just to rub it in, Armaldo gets frozen right at the end. So that's very unfortunate. Anyway, I go back into the battle for my 3rd attempt, and honestly, Rhydon will go down. It was just a really unfortunate range. Ancient Power finishes off Moltres just as before. Out comes Executor, Bullet Seed, gets a crit and takes him down in a single hit. And then once again, out comes Tauros. Now Tauros is always going to set up Shadow Sky followed by Shadow Hold unless it sees a KO on a Pokemon. So it's really not that threatening right off the bat. So it's definitely the better Pokemon to keep alive. And because I know I can probably one-shot the Articuno, the 50% damage boost on Shadow moves shouldn't really matter. Executor goes down, out comes Articuno, and Ancient Power takes it down in a single hit, bringing out his final Pokemon, which is Zapdos. And while it's not 4 times weak to Ancient Power, it should go down just the same. Its Shadow Bolt does a ton of damage, and I'm taken down to 45. And surprisingly, it holds on. Cradily gets an Omni Boost, and then all that's left is the Tauros, which, even if it could, it can't take me down. I do over half to it. Shadow Rush really doesn't do that much. Ancient Power takes it down to a sliver, and if it weren't a Shadow Pokemon, it would have gone down to its own Fruity Pebbles. And with one last Bullet Seed, I'm able to take it down and beat Gravel. So, just how well did these two do together? Well, they beat the game at a time of 10 hours, 41 minutes, and 22 seconds, at level 66 for Armaldo and 64 for Cradily, and lost a total of 12 times, which is pretty good, with 9 of those being to bosses and only 3 of those being to random trainers. So I think overall these Pokemon are very good, with good stats and a varied move pool. Both of them can do quite a bit throughout the game. However, they do drag their feet a bit, literally, because they have a very low speed stat, which allows a lot of time to be wasted because they're constantly having to wait for other Pokemon to act first. So while I do think that they are really good, they find themselves at the top of the B+ tier. So Armaldo is currently the gatekeeper of both B+ and B tier, which is kind of funny. And what's strange is I didn't actually use Cradily as a support Pokemon. In my notes I had set it up to be a bit of an annoying Pokemon with Confuse Ray, Ingrain, Protect, and Ancient Power. That way I could hopefully get the Omni Boost more often by having them hit themselves in Confusion, Ingrain just to heal health because I didn't have leftovers myself, and Protect is always nice, but as it turns out, Cradily is pretty strong once it gets an Omni Boost, even becoming the premier attacker in quite a few battles. So that was fun to see. But anyway, if you did enjoy this video, consider liking and subscribing. If you have any Pokemon suggestions, please put them down below. Thank you so much for watching, and bye!